Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast.
Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Josh Stoner. Coach Stoner is the Director of Sports Performance at Stephen F. Austin. He is responsible for football strength conditioning as well as the development of a comprehensive and integrated sports performance department for all SFA student athletes. Prior to Stephen F. Austin, Coach Stoner was at Texas A&M Commerce, Missouri, Coastal Carolina, Tulsa, Southern Miss, and Centenary College of Louisiana. Coach Stoner has a proven track record of guiding athletes through physical and mental challenges, fostering resilience, and promoting overall wellness. He is passionate about creating environments where staff and athletes thrive together, prioritizing loyalty, emotional awareness, and clear communication. Whether managing high-pressure seasons or mentoring young athletes, Stoner's leadership style reflects a commitment to integrity, creativity, and long-term success. So welcome to the show, Coach.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
This is quite the honor for me. I've got to talk to a lot of guys that have spoke incredibly highly of you, so that you would sit down and come on the show, man. This is awesome.
That's great. Well, I appreciate those guys lying and speaking highly of me, because behind closed doors, they probably say some other things about me, but that's okay.
You just never know. But to me, they were very respectful, and they definitely pointed me down your direction.
Appreciate that. That's great.
You've got to be at some really, really good schools that had some really good departments. How were you able to find yourself in those situations? It can't just be luck. There has to be something you were looking for when you made the move to some of these programs.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's insightful. I mean, I think you should always be aware of your own, your own path, your own trajectory, and not looking to just take a job. There's situations where you obviously will, we all have to pay our bills. That's a requirement, but I think you should always be very thought oriented towards that, as far as, what's my trajectory? What do I want to accomplish? What am I thinking about my own path, and things like that? So, I mean, I guess in the beginning, I was an undergraduate at Centenary College. It took me a little over 4 years. I did a double major. So I had a great relationship with the athletic department. I enjoyed the weight room. It was a small school. They did not have a strength and conditioning coach in athletics, and the athletic trainer, the athletic director gave me the opportunity to be a strength coach straight out of undergrad, which was pretty crazy. And I always look, when I do think about it, like right now, just thinking back on it, man, I was not even ready for any of that. Had some interesting situations. They said, you can have this office in the corner. So I rearranged that. I went up in the weight room and I just started looking around. I was like, well, I don't like this. I don't like this. AD gave me a little bit of money. It wasn't a whole lot, but I did a few things up there, rearranged some things to make it more efficient, I thought, and started writing programs. And, if I look back on those programs now, they're very, very interesting. But I mean, they were something. And, I just started doing that, and I did that for about a year, and then knew I needed to progress on. It wasn't just going to be that. But with that experience, I figured, not being a high-level college athlete, or having, a big brand name behind me, that would at least get me in the door for a graduate assistant. I was very fortunate to get on at Southern Miss with Charlie Dudley. I knew I needed to go move on and get more experience at a bigger university with Division I football and things like that. And that just happened to be a great situation. I did not know Coach Dudley before. Walked into that situation. He was a great leader, tons of autonomy. I mean, I was there for about 45 minutes when he looked into me and he said, "Hey, get out on the floor and watch football and start doing stuff." Because he was in his office doing things. And I think the full-time assistant I think he had men's basketball. I think the other GA was in class. So there I went, 45 minutes into my job, getting after it with some big old dudes. So that was a great experience. And then after that, my first full-time job was at Tulsa with JT Allaire. Another great situation. He left and went to professional football, Buffalo Bills. Pat Ivy came on. And then I think, it was kind of just serendipitous up to that point. I fell into some good situations. I think at that point, that's when I was able to start saying, okay, what I said earlier, have a plan, chart my path. Because when Pat left Tulsa for Missouri, he asked me to go with him, and I had that choice. I wasn't getting fired at Tulsa. They had already hired the guy. I'd already talked to him. I was going to be able to stay, but that was my choice, and I chose to go to Missouri. And then after that, everything was pretty much a choice, except for one time, getting let go in a coaching changeover. But it's been good. But I think you really do need to think about those things and chart your path and be willing to take a different job. You fast forward that, when I did get let go of Missouri, I had been there another 2 years because I had been there 8 years. I left for 2 years to go to Coastal Carolina, came back to Missouri for 2 years, and then the coaching change. I knew once Coach Pinkel resigned and they hired Coach Odom, he had a little bit of uncertainty there, but I already knew in my head that I wanted to go back south because me and my wife are both from the South. We'd been in Missouri. I'd been in South Carolina. She'd been in Missouri. Our families were in Texas and Louisiana. So I was like, Texas, Louisiana, that's what I'm going to do. And I got the A&M Commerce job with a cold resume. I just applied for a job and they called me up. I evaluated that situation. It was a great situation. That's where I won a national championship with football. So great choice. That's right here where that one. Anyway, so yeah, I think you should make choices, and I think you should be willing to not take a job if it doesn't match what you're trying to do.
There was a few things in there that you talked about, and I wonder because at least two times you mentioned you kind of got thrown into a role that you may or may not have been ready for, but the people above you trusted you. So mentoring young coaches who may not be ready all the way for the floor or taking over a program or whatever the case may be, how do you give somebody that works for you enough room to learn it without micromanaging their decisions and keep the program heading in the right direction?
Yes, and that's just a management thing. I mean, early on, I probably wasn't as good at it as I got to it. Later in my career, when I first took the job at Coastal Carolina, it was my first time to really be the director, the guy making all the choices. Everything falls on my lap. But I guess based on my experience and kind of what you said, I my first job I was thrown in my Southern Miss. I was kind of you're a GA, but here you're taking over some things and doing some things. I was able to program my own teams at Southern Miss just off my small experience at seminary. So I'm kind of I'm going to throw you in the deep end kind of guy, but I'm going to be there making sure you don't drown. If you have trouble, then I'm going to ask. But other than that, I don't micromanage. And feel like I've had pretty good success with that. I mean, there's been a couple times where maybe the person I threw in got a little overwhelmed and we had to pull back a little bit. I had to help a little more or have my assistants help a little more. But for the most part, I think it's autonomy. You give that trust and say, I'm trusting you without you having to prove a whole lot to me. And it's your trust to lose. If you start doing things that take that trust away, then that's what's going to happen. I will take things away. And if you get to the point where you're not an effective staff member, then that's when we have to have a discussion about the future. I've never had to get to that point, but that's the way I present it. At GA, every GA I've ever had has programmed their own teams. I don't overlook their stuff. I say, here's your program. You are the head coach for this team. You will meet with the coach. You will work the schedule. You will program for the team, and you will handle it just like I handle team right now. Football, but that's basically it. A lot of autonomy, a lot of trust, and it's yours to run with or lose, basically.
The one thing about autonomy I've noticed is some people are really scared by it. They want
Yes.
they want somebody there to tell them, okay, I want you to do this, 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 and this. So when you get a reliant coach that really leans heavy on you, how do you kind of start breaking that bond a little bit where they can become more reliant on themselves?
I'll just listen because what that usually looks like is them coming talking to me a lot. Hey, you got a second? Yes. Not really, but yes. So, giving them my attention, listening, nodding, but never giving them an out. It's not saving them, not, oh, well, here's what you need to do. Well, what do you think you need to do? Well, I think, well, then do it. What if this? What if this? I mean, That's it. That's the whole thing right there. What if this? I mean, there's no guarantees. I make decisions with football, and I think something that helps is to have a staff meeting. I'm not going to speak to how many people actually do it. I know it's something that I've always done or been a part of, and it's just been. Whatever job I have, we're going to have staff meetings. I don't care if you like them or not. We're going to sit down and be in a room together and see each other face to face and have discussions. But what I usually do is I always have a note or two, and I always share my interactions, like in a with the head coach or in a full staff team, football team meeting or whatever it is. I'll give them anecdotes. Hey, this happened in the meeting, and here's what I said, and here's how it went. And yeah, I angered the whoever coach in this or whatever, but my job is to be the expert in this area. And when it falls in that area, I'm going to speak expertly on it. I'm not going to back off and say, whatever. And I think that helps, giving them those stories and giving them those, but you can't do that without having the meeting, in my opinion. You might be able to do it on the floor, but that's with one or two. Everybody's in the meeting together and we have those discussions. And then hopefully over time, what you get is people being more willing to share and talk. And what I'll do periodically, it's not every staff meeting, but it's like, okay, we'll go around. Your two sports go. And I want to hear what they have to say, because then that tells me what's going on. And it also gives me insight into their development and maybe some things that I need to be looking for to help them out on. So it's not a structured professional development, so to speak. We're not sitting down with an agenda, but it's professional development constantly, I think.
Now, how many meetings are you looking at? Do you do a daily wrap up? Do you do a daily kickoff? Do you do a weekly? How do you set that up?
Yeah, it's dependent on the year. Weekly meeting in the spring and the fall. In the summer, don't usually do a weekly meeting because we meet every day for football. That's the only time I meet every single day for football, because it's just the summer program is more involved. It's the most involved time of the year for the full staff. The off season is involved. The in season is involved too, but that summer program is a little bit more intensive for us. So we do constant daily meetings. So that's kind of a daily meet. We do go over football, but then if there's other things from a departmental administrative standpoint, I hit on it then. So we're not doing, the 45-minute to an hour team meeting in the summer, but during the fall and the spring, it's weekly. It's on the schedule. We program it prior to the semester, so it goes on our master calendar. So it's like, okay, this is the time. And I've had instances where coaches don't want to, uh, they acquiesce to their head coach. Oh, I've got to train this team. And that's when I get a little bit irritated, because I'm like, we went over this as a staff and you had this in hand, and you are allowing somebody to tell you what to do because you think you answer to that person, when in reality, we are our own department. I am your supervisor. I understand the trepidation to not acquiesce to your head coach, but this is the way it's got to be. So, because I think it's that important. I just think it's something that's so valuable to us to be on the same page, to have those conversations, because head coaches are about their teams. And when, like I said, I give everybody that autonomy. You're meeting with your head coach. If you don't know what the left and the right are doing, the other teams and the other staff, those conversations that have been happening, or what they're thinking about doing from a scheduling standpoint, the schedule's huge to me. So I think if you don't have a schedule, that's where a lot of people get burnt out, is because nobody knows what's going on, and it's like, oh crap, what are we doing? And then you start complaining, and then you start defending, and then you're just getting into this area it's so unproductive. So yeah, I just think that's what you got to do.
When is it time to move on?
I think, if a person, that's a great question. If you do get to the point where you think you need to move on, that's when you have to start documenting very heavily, because you will have to deal with HR. That's the reality. So you have to start having a plan, and it's not deceitful. It's just, it's not manipulative. It's just part of the deal. If you get to a point where, okay, I think we may need to move on. Then I have to start documenting. I have to start, okay, what steps do I need to take? And then that way, when it, if it does come down to the point of letting somebody go, then you have what you need. Okay, these are the areas that are failing, and it's too big for us to overcome, and we need to move on. But I think competency is huge. So I think a big chunk of it is competency. I think if there's just a complete lack of competency and the athletes are not getting what they need, and it's spilling over to the other step, because like I said, everybody has their own team and you're responsible for your team. But if too much of that spills out to this assistant and that assistant and this assistant, then that becomes a problem, because those are detrimental to the team function, if that makes sense.
Through your career, you've been very innovative and worked with guys that were very innovative. You go clear back to some of that Brian Mann's ideas and some of Pat Ivy's ideas and what he's doing now. And then you've moved into a role that's very similar. You've watched the field change tremendously, and a lot of it for the better. How do you separate legitimate ideas from just the hype of a new trend?
I think you do it. I think you should always train. I think you should always be trying. Obviously, as you get older, you're not going to do it at the same level, but you try it and you see what it's about. I was listening to you and Pat discuss this, and that's what we did at Missouri heavily. We trained ourselves and we tried out a lot of things before they went into the program for our athletes. Obviously, we're dealing with, at that point, we're dealing with some really, really, really talented young men, and a lot of, first round draft picks, free agents. A lot of guys, a lot of those guys that we coached there were in the league for a long time. It wasn't just a couple years. But I think for the most part, that's what you do. We travel together, we train, conjugate training, West Side method. We did chains and bands. We had a monolift. We used it. We knew what it was about. We knew how to. So when a guy had 800 pounds on his back, and you had the operator here and the guy spotting operator on the other side, everybody knew what that was about, how that worked, because we did it ourselves. Box squatting and jump, plyometrics, and I mean, we did some crazy stuff. I blew out my knee one time doing this stuff. And I called it right before it happened. I said, this is where the young and the old get separated. Next thing I know, I've got a torn patella. So that's what happens. But I wouldn't know a lot of things that I know without doing them myself. So I think doing it is a huge piece of it.
I heard you talk about this and I thought it was pretty unique because maybe we don't step back and look at it enough. But in a lot of instances, we're having the same conversation with athletes 4 years later that we did the first day they walked into the gym or they walked into the floor. How do you advance that conversation where it evolves into something that actually is meaningful and not just the same routine stuff every time you see them?
I've had the experience of being at many different places that have different resources. Missouri, big resources. Texas A&M Commerce, not big resources. Stephen F. Austin, a little more than what's East Texas State now, but a little more than East Texas State, but not what Missouri was. Coastal Carolina at the time, they're FBS now, but we were FCS when I was there. But we had good resources for an FCS team. I would say comparatively, it's two different eras, but comparatively, that FCS program at the time I was there was a little bit upscale from what SFA is, but is progressing towards. So I think that has a lot to do with it. I cannot resonate with every single athlete at SFA, East Texas, but at Missouri, we were able to kind of compartmentalize that because each of us would connect with different athletes. So if you connect with them, then it's a little bit easier. But when you can't, when it's harder to connect, that's when those conversations, and it's you go on down the line, and in high school as well. I haven't coached high school personally, but I have two high school. Well, they've both been through high school. My youngest son is finishing this year, so I can see that now. Because throughout the last 8 years of them going through high school, I see that better now. But yeah, I think it's just I think you have to be consistent in your messaging. I think you have to consistently present yourself and not be hypocritical, not just speak rhetoric, not be overly romantic. those are three things that I kind of, in the last part of my career, I romance rhetoric and hypocrisy. I think it's rampant in college athletics, but I'm not going to get off on a tangent. But don't be overly romantic. Don't spit rhetoric, because rhetoric leads to hypocrisy, and athletes see through that. So if you show up every day and you're busting your butt and you're saying things that you back up, then I think eventually even the hardest kids to get through to will appreciate it, even if they don't show it. I mean, you're dealing with, especially the fellas, the football players. They're not always going to show you that they're listening, but all of a sudden you see them or they say something, you're like, dang, you were listening. Okay, that's crazy. But I think it's just about being extremely consistent, not being hypocritical, and being authentic.
I think rhetoric falls into every aspect of our lives. I don't know why humans love rhetoric so much, but we seem to fall into it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you keep yourself isolated from just falling into the same old traps and speaking the same kind of crap that they hear from everybody?
I think you need to have a little more bandwidth than just the weight room. You need to have interests outside of just, going back to what I said, you need to lift, you need to train, but you should have interests outside of that, and you should see connections, because I think everything's connected. My wife is in the medical field. She's a nurse anesthetist, but me and her can have conversations, not about her job, what she does, sitting at the machine, putting somebody to sleep, and waking them up, and how that happens in an OR. But we can have conversations about the team dynamic in an OR. We can have conversations about the what happens outside of the OR when they're in the break room, or when they're interacting with each other. We can have those conversations because it's pretty much universal human interaction, human beings. It's a lot of the same stuff. I think that helps. Me and my wife talk, but reading outside of your lane, your zone, your interests. I mean, I read Stephen Hawking's book one time. It took me forever. Like, I had to go back and read, and I'm like, I have no idea what this is about, but I'm going to read it. But I had to reread things, and it took me a long, long time to read that book. But it's just an example. You do things that kind of stretch you, create more bandwidth, and I think that helps.
With that, it seems like whatever the top says, everybody below has to agree with that. And that's where a lot of rhetoric comes in. Even though the people don't believe it, they don't buy into it. It's like it must be said. So
Mm-hmm.
at what point do you break away from that, but then have your bosses above you understand why it is important that sometimes you do break away from that?
Yes, yeah, no, that's a good point too. I think what I've always tried to do is stay within that, but give it depth. If we're gonna say, trying to trying to think of a good example, but my most recent head coach, Colby Carthel, he would come up with something for the week. Okay, this is what we're gonna hammer on. So then I would take that and I would give it. I would like, okay, what do we need to give this more depth? And I would talk about that before the lift, or okay, word of the week is commitment. We'll just say, commitment is a good one. But what does that actually mean? What does that look like? How does that feel? Things like that, and just kind of getting into the weeds of it to give it more meaning than just a word, and it's just being something out there being tossed around. So that's kind of my angle that I've always taken is, okay, we're going to talk about this, but what's the depth? What's under the water? The whole iceberg thing. You got the tip, you got the rest of it. What's under the water? Let's get into that area, because that's where that stuff's going to actually make a difference.
I think it was an article I had read that you had talked about, but that point where you're pushing guys and you're pushing guys hard. It's a highly competitive environment that you play in. Everybody has that point where they can no longer be pushed, and you actually start regressing them mentally. How have you been able to balance when the push stops and when another coaching aid has to come in to balance that out?
That's obviously a very, very large challenge, and I kind of go back to what I said earlier. If you're in Missouri, it's easier to do that. You can see that, okay, I'm not working. This is not working. I need to back up, but we have other people that can bring it in. And do some different things and we talk about it and say, okay, this is what happened today. Okay. And then somebody else can, but when you have less resources and you are more of a one-off type of person, then I think you got to kind of, you branch out a little bit and be willing to, create those relationships with the staff. I like at SFA, I don't have a problem with coaches being in the weight room. Some coaches might feel a certain way about that. If you're in there, uh, I do get irritated if they're over there. We'll do this, and I'm like, I'm not saying that that feeling isn't there, but I think it matters to have that, to create that kind of extended coaching family. It's like, and then if a coach asks me something because they saw it in the weight room, and then I can tell them, okay, yeah, this is this and this, and then they can address it and do something with it, if that makes sense.
The one thing I often wonder is everybody has a point where their environment gets very high pressure. Your environment can be high pressure all the time. And you got to manage the staff. And a lot of these guys and girls you're taking on are GAs or they're interns. They're very young in the trade. How do you keep yourself separated from that and not just take over and just do it all yourself because the pressure is so high that if you do it, it'll be right. How do you keep that distance?
I think you got to keep perspective that, it's like what I always tell my staffs, we are just stewards of our jobs. We are not going to be here for, even if you are somewhere for 30 years, you're not going to be there for the cumulative time that that program exists. The program existed before you got there. It will exist after you leave. What was it like when you came in? Is it getting better? Does somebody else inherit something that was better than what you inherited? I think that matters. I think that's good stewardship. So I think keeping that perspective helps. You will get to the point, it's unavoidable, that you feel like, okay, screw all this, I'm taking over because it's got to be done. But if you have that perspective, you can realize that's what you're doing and it's momentary. And then you stop and then you go back to what you were doing before. But if you can't have that perspective, then you get caught in that cycle and everybody's just like, well, he's just going to do it himself. So I'm just going to show up, be a little bit disconnected. I need everybody connected. I need everybody engaged because I think that helps keep some of that pressure off when everybody walks in the door with a, purpose of, okay, we're going to get these people right today. Our job is to run a 30 to 1 hour session of high quality training for these athletes. So I think that's what you do is you got to keep perspective.
Now you're not on the floor like you used to be, I'm sure, with some of the other roles you've taken on. You have a staff that's handling a lot of that. So how are you able to lead effectively when you may not see every aspect of the day? They just have to trust that you know what's going on. How are you able to establish effective leadership, not seeing everything happen?
Yeah, I think that's again going back to the staff meetings. That's part of the staff meeting is discussing, and like I said, I'll say what's going on. But if I'm not present, like you said, things will pull you away, and like primary sport is football, and yeah, there are times where I'm not in the room and the staff is running the session, but there's a certain protocol, there's a certain sequence. Everybody runs that sequence, and I'm okay if they do it with their flair. I don't want them stepping up and feeling like they got to do it like me or act like me because that's not how you get those athletes to listen and follow. So, but there'll be a debrief. Hey, how things go? Let me know. Or if I'm not even in the area, if I'm out, then it's a text. I've had to do that with young staff. I'm waiting, I'm waiting, I'm waiting. I'm like, okay, I gotta send the text. Hey, I need an update on what happened with this. And then all of a sudden, bing, 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 I get all the updates. But that's kind of how I do it. Debrief, update, give me your thoughts. And then there are always a handful of guys that you trust their feedback. So you'll hit them up at the next session. Hey, how'd things go last time? Anything, anything I need to know. And oh yeah, it's a great, perfect. Didn't even know you were gone. Great answer.
Now, this I wonder because I feel like I've kind of In certain instances, I'm extroverted, but in others, I'm introverted. So I think you described yourself as being an introvert, but you're in an extrovert driven profession.
Exactly.
How are you able to push yourself out there and be somebody that maybe you're not totally comfortable with being all the time?
Yeah, I think what you got to do is you got to understand what that means. And I am introverted. I've done the MBTI. I've done other personality evaluations, and every time it's introvert, full on. There's no even crossover. It's like sometimes in like on the MBTI, you take that and it's like on that edge, and you can kind of go back and forth. But I'm full introvert. So what I know about that is when I am in an extroverted environment, when I am having to be that person that is just draining energy, I am getting drained, and I understand that. So I know at the end of a long session, or if I have football in the morning, I go to a bunch of admin meetings, or I have to go to a football meeting. I know that day I'm going to be feeling it. I'm going to be tired. I'm going to be feeling it. So I need to recharge, and that means I need to be alone. So I will leave and go home and sit and eat lunch, or I just have to have those moments where I'm sitting alone and not having anything take my energy away, so I can kind of recoup some of that. So I think that's what you have to understand is you just have to do the work on yourself, just like you have to do the work on your athletes. A lot of times, I think in our profession, we get distracted by everything out here. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. I've got to handle this. This athlete's having this, but then you have to do something for yourself. And part of that is understanding yourself. And that's something we did it in Missouri. We were big into professional development. We took a lot of different evaluations, and then we would sit with those evaluations and talk about those evaluations and get a better understanding of ourselves, but also each other, which helped us be a better team because now that hey, when I'm sitting here for hours doing a bunch of extroverted things, I'm going to be tired and I'm not going to talk. I don't do small talk. Speaking on this podcast, I'm talking about things I love and care about. But if we sat in a room together and it was just about small talk, you probably wouldn't get a lot out of me. My kids are like, you don't talk a lot. And I'm like, well, that's just who I am because I don't do small talk because that's just part of my personality. And when I do that, then yeah, I get a little exhausted. But yeah, I think it really does start with doing the work on yourself and understanding yourself and not being embarrassed. I don't know if embarrassed is the word, or not apologizing for it. Like I've gotten to the point where that's who I am, and I'm an intense because I'm introverted and because there's certain things I care about a lot. When we get into those situations I care about a lot, I'm very, 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 very intense. And a lot of people misconstrue that as anger, and it can be. There can be a little bit of anger with it, but they think, oh my gosh, he's angry, he's mad, but I'm just feeling very intense about what I care about. And so I've had to do work on that to make sure I don't present that in a way that is intimidating. Because, if you're sitting in a room, an admin meeting with AD and all the associate ADs and all that, and there's a discussion, I have to make sure my tone and how I'm presenting things, even though I'm feeling very intense about it, I have to make sure I'm marking that and not going too hard. But with athletes, sometimes that comes out. It's like, oh, coaches, you know, he's crashing out, but I'm not crashing. It's just the way I feel about it. Very intense.
Now, what clued you into that you could be too intense for the situation you were in because you were passionate about it? It seems like it's taken me my whole dang life before I started realizing that. What gave you the insight that you needed to have a little bit better emotional awareness?
Yep. Doing those evaluations. I think a big one that we did one time, I can't remember the first time I did it, the 360 evaluation. That one takes forever. It's like millions of questions, and you get like a book that's like that thick, and it's all about you. But looking through that and reading some certain things, and then feedback. We always did evaluations as part of our process at Missouri. And, in those evaluations, sometimes things would come up, and there was kind of a theme there. And early on, I didn't understand. I'm just like, well, what's wrong with that? I'm good. It's just the way I'm feeling about it. But then as I progressed and understood a little more and got into the weeds about my personality and understanding how that presented to other people. And I was also fortunate enough to do when I was in Missouri, I was part of this leadership development program for administrators. You had to apply for it, and they only took a certain amount of people from. It was all campus. It was the entire Columbia campus. So I was in this leadership development program with people from all across the campus, and that was pretty insightful because I had some people in there give me feedback, and it was just I think it was over 4 days, and I'm getting feedback about what other people have been telling me that work with me all the time, and I'm like, okay, I'm starting to see now. So I think being willing to hear that feedback and do something about it, that's part of your own personal adaptability. But and that goes back to the hypocrisy thing. We as coaches are always telling athletes to adapt, listen, be coachable. Well, we have to be coachable as well. So not always easy.
Yeah, when you start getting into some stuff that you could view as a weakness and that you really don't want people to know about, or you don't want, I don't know, maybe they turn into an insecurity and then we don't want to mess with them. Uh, Getting past that and creating something better, it's going to take some work.
For sure.
I think Pat Ivy said this about you, but he said you had the ability to take complex information and relay it back to the athletes in something that they could understand without being boring or confusing. How are you able to get athletes to understand some of the concepts that you're trying to bring in to the athletic department without, like we said earlier, without it just being rhetoric? How are you getting them to understand that, hey, we need to do this because of all of these reasons, and have it be truthful?
I think honesty is a big one. I think most people can at some point feel like if you're being manipulative, and I think you turn people off. I mean, if you personally feel like you're getting manipulated, you're going to be like, I'm just going to ride this, whatever this is, and I'm just going to move on because this is not for me. So I think you definitely want to be, honest, authentic, not manipulative, but having the understanding. Uh, I think you personally have to understand prior to trying to relay that with two other people, because there's no way to break down a complexity and make it more simple if you don't have some understanding. So don't dive into something that you're not ready to dive into. The pressure is going to exist, but don't give in to the pressure to say, oh, I've got to say this because I feel like I have somebody's pushing me to say this. Well, I'm not going to say this because I'm not ready to say this. So I think you have to make those internal choices and be willing to do that. Maybe not to your detriment, but to questions, to creating somebody questioning you on why. Well, why aren't you saying this, or why aren't you promoting this? Well, because I don't understand it, and I don't want to relay this to our athletes without understanding it because I can't help them buy into it. If that makes sense.
I know listening to you talk, and maybe this will tie into a little bit of handling complex information and relating to athletes and all different things, but you've got to manage some seasons that aren't perfect. I think maybe it was at Tulsa, you guys went 1-11 one year and then turned around and went 8-5 the next year just with the leadership change.
Yes.
How do you not, I mean, when things are 1-11, you can see what's not going good, and you can probably see the changes that need to be made, but you don't get the availability to just walk through the hallways and openly talk about the things you think need to be changed. So how do you relate to athletes that are struggling just like you are, staff that's struggling just like you are? Everybody sees what needs to happen, but you don't navigate away from the positivity and just pushing forward on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's so that example. So that 1-11 season was my first full-time season as a strength and conditioning coach. That was my first year at Tulsa, and they had come off I think they were 5-7, 5-7. All of a sudden 1-11. Yes, that was a difficult season, but I think what we did was we just made it about the present. Stay in the present. It's about today. What are you doing today to get better? What are you doing today to make yourself better, to move forward? The reality is there's going to be adversity in your life, and getting them to really believe and understand that as bad as this feels, as crappy as this is, as miserable as this is, it isn't only a piece of your life. If you live to 90 years old, you're talking about a few months of your life right now. And yes, it'll be a piece of your past, it'll be a piece of your experiences, but at the same time, you'll move on to different experiences and have success and thrills and elation later on down the line. So I think that was kind of what I mean. It was early in Pat's career too. I mean, we were both sitting there just kind of, and Rusty. I think Pat talked about Rusty and Bernie in his thing. It was just the three of us, me, Pat Ivy, Rusty, Bernie, and myself, and we all just kind of looked at each other and we just said, let's have some, let's make sure that they're enjoying our piece of what we do, because that's what we can control. And we were all pretty intelligent guys, and I think we did a decent job of that. We had some good kids. A lot of those kids that went 1-11 were the reason we went 8-5.
So now you have a time of change in there, and you have to establish your leadership style during that time of change. How do you maintain, I don't know, like a lighthouse or whatever, when everything is hard to see and how things are going to shape up? How do you be that one spot in your organization that the kids can count on to be the same every day?
Enjoy what you do. I mean, no matter what, I mean, at the end of the day, what we are able to do, the physical improvement translates to the rest of your life. I mean, it's being able to walk in, because you don't want to train every day. I don't want to train every day. I mean, there's days I'm like, no, I don't want to do this. Like, but then I just you make yourself do it. And athletes feel like they have little less of a choice, but they still have a choice. It's, you're coming in because you were told to, and because this is the time you're supposed to be here. Or you can say, I'm here because I want to do something with myself. Presenting it that way, and just going back to the consistency piece, being consistent with that, not going away from that, and always, that always lives in what you're talking about and how you operate.
Well, that would bring up the question I have, because I'm like you. Not everybody wants to be in the gym every single day. Yes, we love what we do, but sometimes the sun's shining, it's pretty nice outside, and your mind's wandering. How do you stay motivated and avoid the burnout, especially in high athletics?
I think for the athletes, I think what you have to do as a person, so for in my position, so I'm the director of a department, a unit. What I do is I set parameters from a scheduling standpoint. This is what we're going to do operationally. First group won't be before 6 a.m. and our last group won't be after 6 p.m. And that will ruffle some feathers. So you have to be willing to say why. And the reason why is because, number one, they got to get sleep. And two, they need to be able to eat. Three, they need to be able to socialize. They need to have some kind of time to socialize. I mean, that's at the minimum, they should be able to decompress with their friends. And you don't give them any time if you're just wide open and say, oh, well, you want to train at 7:30 because you couldn't make a better schedule? Sure, you can come into the weight room. No, we're not going to do that because we're not making good decisions. I've gotten to the point, and it's over the last, 8 or so, 9 years, as my kids matriculated in high school. If I won't do it for my kid, I'm not going to do it for anybody else's. So we're not gonna make decisions that end up screwing kids and burning them out. We're going to make decisions that give them the best chance to succeed in a very hard environment, which is, being an athlete with the demands of your sport, being an athlete with the other demands. I mean, you go into college, and this is what a lot of kids don't even have a clue about: community service, this meeting, that meeting, all the extras around being an athlete that get put on you outside of just meeting time, practice time, extra meeting time, coach calling you. those are direct to your sport, right? Well, they don't understand all those other things. And people kind of get that lost as well. As I'm always saying, be as effective as you can with your programming, get what you need and get them out. And yes, it's fine if somebody wants to do extra, but get what they need and get them rolling because they need to be able to do other things because that's what keeps us sane. So that's kind of where I'm at with, and I'll speak to that in admin meetings and things like that. When the opportunity arises, I say, okay, well, we need to make sure that our coaches are cognizant of these athletes' time because I think that's the biggest commodity is time. Don't screw them on their time. Stop adding time. When we built the new basketball facility at SFA, it was all inclusive. I said, well, here's what's going to happen. You're just going to add because all of a sudden you got everything in house. You're just going to start adding. And that's what happened. So people build these facilities and now you have the ability to do everything right there. I can go eat here. I can go to training room here. I can go to academics here. And then it's like, oh, we've got all this extra time. Let's fill it. I don't think that's always the answer.
I think maybe athletes' time is the first thing that's taken for granted. And the first thing taken away, it's just like they're here to play ball. They'll do what we tell them to do. And sometimes you can create a atmosphere very quickly that is not going the direction you want just because you didn't give some kids some time off to just decompress.
That was an interesting thing I saw the other day with the Arizona State coach. He gave them the whole week off. I'm not sure if they actually gave them the whole week off, but that's what he said with their bye week. And I thought that was interesting, especially in today's world. But it caught my attention because I'm always thinking about athletes' time.
Now, one of the unique coaches you got to coach for was at Coastal Carolina. Very boardroom oriented, come from TD Ameritrade, had coached, went to TD Ameritrade, come back to coaching. So there's a bunch of lessons that could probably be learned in there, but the lessons from the boardroom, meshing the high pace changes of investing money, all that's changing hourly, to college football that changes pretty quickly. What were some of the things that brought a unique perspective to what you had been doing when you started working with Moglia?
That was a interesting transition because I was coming off, working at Missouri for 8 years, and Coach Pinkel was a very regimented person. We had a program that you knew what we were doing from January to December, and there was adjustments made, but the basis of it was always the same, and we were consistent. So from a programming standpoint and system building standpoint and how a high level program goes, there was a lot of great things with that. But when I started working with Coach Moglia, we always called it robot mode. I kind of was in robot mode, and I would meet with him and I'd be saying things, and basically what I ended up doing was giving him too much because that's what I was used to doing, was giving everything. And you need every slice and piece and sliver of information because that's what head coaches need. And I remember one time he stopped me and said, "Why are you telling me all this?" And I said, "Well, don't you need it? You're the head coach." And he said, "No, I hired you to be the guy in charge." And I just stopped and I looked at him, and it really, it was like one of the only times and first times in my career that I was just completely like, what are you talking about? That doesn't compute with me. And I remember going back to my office and I remember sitting down and thinking, okay, so I don't need to. Yeah, it just took me a minute over the, next few weeks or so. And I started understanding what he meant, which was my job was to make decisions that's best for the team training wise, let him know what those decisions are. And then he nods his head and says, "Perfect. I hired you to do this job and I'm trusting these guys to be ready to play football, and you back up what we're saying and understand what we're saying and be competent in what my messaging to the team is," which was really simple. It was about being a man. That's what he taught. He says that most of the time when you hear him speak and he's talking about athletics, he's talking about being a man, accept responsibility for yourself and understand the consequences of your actions. One of the simplest things ever, but very, very extremely hard to take ownership of and execute. So yeah, that was a real interesting time. And then also my wife was in nurse anesthesia school in Springfield, Missouri, during my time at Coastal. That was over 2 years. And I let him know that before I took the job. I said, if I take this job, my wife is in Missouri and I will want to go see her. And he didn't blink. He just said, oh, yeah, sure. No problem. I mean, there's times of year, like in May, you can probably just take the whole month, which that, I guess that was really the first time that kind of threw me off was I was like, what? I was just thinking like a week, but he's talking about, just whenever. I remember during the bye week, first off season, he's like, are you going home? I said, well, we got training. He said, no, you need to go see your family. And he made me go see my family. And the assistants ran the bye week. And that was interesting, but that's who he was. And that's how he operated. As you said, he was the CEO of TD Ameritrade. He was still the chairman of the board while he was head coaching with me for TD Ameritrade. So yeah, a lot of valuable lessons learned from him.
So there's a few questions in there. Do you think he brought such a perspective from the outside world, the normal world, that he knew how people or the things that really motivated people and the things that would help people be more successful by doing those things, as opposed to the realm of athletics where there is no day off and we're gonna try to fit this mold, but then maybe have people not be so happy. Like if he wouldn't have give you any time off and then you and your wife have trouble, are you going to be the Josh Stoner he needs you to be?
Right.
Do you think that perspective comes from not being totally immersed in athletics?
Yes, I think so. I remember sitting in early on when the staff first formulated and he got all his assistants hired and they weren't all people that knew him. He hired people that he thought would do the job really well. And there was a couple of people because he was with a UFL team in the Omaha team prior to that for a year. So he had a couple guys. I think a couple guys were on his staff that he brought to Coastal. So those guys knew him. And then his chief of staff, his director of ops, they had known each other for years. So that was kind of his man. He brought him in to handle all the stuff. His name was George Glenn, and he never talked to Joe. He just told Joe. He's like, this is what, blah, blah, blah. And Joe's like, okay. And then sometimes, he'd get involved, but he knew that's what George brought to the table. And he knew if he brought George in that piece was off his plate and he could focus on the staff. But I remember sitting in those staff meetings and watching how uncomfortable these coaches who had been only athletics were when he was talking about things like recruiting or our weekly schedule. Because I think it was every day he had a cutoff time. And I know some coaches do this now, make their staff go home. But the people this was 2012, and the people in the room were, well, how are we going to? And he goes, we'd be more efficient. And that was something he said early on. He's like, coaches are the worst, most inefficient time users ever. And he said that at a staff meeting to all of us. And he said, y'all will sit there and sit in an office and BS and not do any work. And then around 4:00, you're like, oh, I got to get these things done when they could have already been done and you could be at home with your family. So he pushed everybody to just like do your work without, he didn't take away the social piece, coaches could still interact and, things like that. But it's like, just be efficient. Don't be a waster of time. And I probably where a lot of my time recognition started really making more sense was with Joe and being as efficient as you can and getting the work done and being high level. But I remember that. I remember the coaches were super uncomfortable. I remember looking at a couple of them were like, oh man, I don't think we're going to be any good. We can't do, he's telling us not to do this way and that. But we ended up going 8-5 and then 12-2, something like that. Best seasons in school history.
Yeah, sometimes you just need a different perspective. Sometimes the perspective that's always been there may not be the one that navigates you to new success.
Mhm.
The one thing I wonder is money wasn't a driver for him. He had money. That might be
Right.
something that is a unique perspective to see. How does somebody operate when they're just working in their passion and money's not a driving factor?
Yeah, you could tell is because of that, he had a vision, he believed in that vision, and there was no trepidation as far as executing that vision because, like you said, he didn't have to have the job. He expected to win with the plan and the coaches and everybody he put together. And, that's just what he worked towards every day. It wasn't like oh man, I might lose my job and lose my money. I think he took, whatever his salary was is pretty minimal in comparison to FCS head coaches at that time. But one thing he did do was in his contract, he said, I think for a conference win, yeah, it was started with a winning conference, and then every round of the playoffs, he got a certain amount, just a lump sum of money, uh, bonused to him through his contract. But then he got to decide how that was dispersed with the staff. So he said, well, I don't remember what the numbers were, but I think our third year, we won conference, or our second year. Sorry, I was on there too. Second year conference, 3 rounds deep in the playoffs. And then he got all that money and he just said, okay, you're going to get this much. You're going to get this much. You're going to get this much, which up to that point I had never heard of or seen. In Missouri, I was fighting for scraps as an assistant strength coach. It's like, oh, well, if they feel like giving me this every year, it was different because we went to a lot of bowl games and I don't think it was ever consistent what I got as far as postseason things like that. But he was like, I want control of that because I want to be able to pay my people because, FCS at that time, none of those guys were making a whole lot of money. Uh, but that was great. I thought that was a unique way to do things, and I thought it was a fair way to do things.
Well, before I let you go, I just got it. I didn't get it in time to get completely through it, but you wrote a book with Pat Ivy, Complete Conditioning for Football. And what I've gotten into so far has been really good. So I took a few questions from that this morning, and then we'll kind of wrap up with that. But one of the things in the first few pages, and I don't know who wrote what as far as the book went and how you compiled it. So the book as a whole, we'll just act like you wrote it all, and then we'll just handle it that way. But finding ways to get your athletes to believe you are the best at what you're doing and you are the authority on what you're doing so that they choose to follow you. How are you able to present yourself in a manner that the athletes truly believe you are the best strength coach in the nation?
Yeah, there's some complexity to that. I think number one, you have to be competent. You don't have to be the smartest. You don't have to be the most well read, but you do have to be competent. You have to understand the human body. You have to understand how it responds to stress, which is what essentially what our job is we impose stress and the body adapts. And then how the things that, help that stress response the best, from a recovery standpoint, nutrition and things like that. So you have to be able to speak on all those things. So I think a comprehensive approach and being competent in those areas and being consistent with what you do and how you present yourself. I think what you are as an individual, training wise, speaks to that as well. I think if they know that you're practicing what you preach, so to speak, I'm not saying you're perfect. I'm not saying you have to sort of have a certain body type or you have to be able to bench or squat a certain thing. But if you're asking somebody to squat more, and they're a strong dude and it's 600 pounds, you yourself need to understand what that strain feels like. So if you're saying get it, there has to be like kind of a visceral tone behind that. They understand that what this feels like right now. It doesn't matter if you squatted 400 and they squat 600. That 400 to you was 600 for them, if that makes sense. Because that's the way we, Missouri with the PR. we didn't care what your PR was. It was your PR. So we celebrated that. So doing that, and I think that speaks to it, practicing what you preach and being able to understand what you're asking of your athletes, the authenticity. I think that helps. But yeah, competency, consistency, authenticity. I think that matters.
Now, this question I saw in there, and I think it's easy to get this mixed up. But the role is to critique performance, but they can't come off like a personal attack. It seemed like coaches, the easy thing to grasp is the critique part. The hard thing to grasp is not making it personal and making it a growing discussion. How are you able to keep that where the athlete knows that, hey, he has my best interest in mind. I see what he's saying, and I can grow from the criticism he's giving me.
It's obviously dependent on the athlete. I mean, there's a lot of sensitive athletes out there, and it doesn't really matter what your tone is or your messaging or the words that you choose to use. They are going to take it as a personal attack, and in those cases, uh, you cannot back away. They're going to have an adverse reaction. They're not going to like it. You understand that's happening. Don't exacerbate it by making it something else. Hey, this is coaching. And then that's it. And then the next time you do it the same way. And then I think over time, a lot of those athletes eventually understand that it's a critique and not to take it a personal attack. That's a hard thing to do when you get the kids into your program, the new ones, and that obviously happens more and more now. But then there's kids who were parented a certain way and they get it and they're easier to coach and critique. But I think it's just about being demanding, that no demeaning, hey, that looks like whatever expletive. Hey, that's not the best you can do. Just being able to say the same thing with more demanding tone as opposed to something they perceive as demeaning. And over time, they understand you're not personally attacking them. You're attacking their performance. It's about what we're doing in here right now to get better. You're not, whatever it is. You're not pushing your feet through the floor. You're not popping your hips. You're not punching the elbows at the top. Get more violent. Stop being tentative or whatever it is, but just consistently attacking that. And I think walking around the room and saying that generally helps as well, as opposed to walking up to an at. But if you're just kind of like buzzing the weight room and just using some general stuff, just boom, 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 and they hear that, it kind of what the word is, it sensitizes them to when you do personally address them.
I'll hit you with this last one, Coach. I know you're busy, but we had a discussion earlier in the week. We were kind of texting back and forth. You were at Columbia last weekend watching your son wrestle. I had a kid from the gym that was over there wrestling. You kind of knew who he was, got to watch that. And saying that, how do you create that time? I mean, you've got a full-time job in Texas. Columbia, Missouri is not very close to where you are in Texas. You made time to do everything you had to do at work, get away, go watch him wrestle for a day, get flipped around in your car and get back so you were able to do the job you needed to do. How are you able to balance all that with those big road trips?
It's about prioritizing things and having difficult conversations with people that might not understand what your priorities are. It wouldn't work at Ohio State. It wouldn't work probably at Missouri anymore. But with the people I've aligned myself with and associated with, it works. And that's conscious choices. So that's kind of what we opened with, right? It was purposefully understanding what you want and like I said, being present for my kid's stuff is a priority. And like you said, my kid wrestles at Missouri, and this is his third year, and right now he's the starting heavyweight, and that's a big deal. That this other one right here, that's his state championship. This is our championship wall: state championship in wrestling, national championship in football. But those things are important. So just prioritizing those things and being willing to have those difficult conversations and put yourself out there in an uncomfortable way. But like I said, I've aligned myself with people that understand that. So
Well, like you said, the interview, and not on purpose, but the interview did manage to come full circle from the start. So That's probably a good place to wrap up and let you enjoy the rest of your day. But that you would stop, take time, and answer all of these questions. It's truly remarkable that guys want to do this, and I'm grateful every time somebody says yes.
No, it's great. I mean, very professional about what you do. A lot of back and forth, a lot of transparency about, hey, this is how this is going to go. And I think it's great. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. I'll just be honest. I'm not a super podcast guy, but I have listened to a couple years now that I'm on yours. I'll probably listen to a couple more. I think these are good questions, good insight, applicable stuff, not just kind of uh, attention getting stuff.
I hope that's how people view about it. I don't know. I'm not smart enough in culture to know what actually is attention getting. So I just do it the way I do it, and we'll see how it ends up at the end.
Well, that Masters of the Universe thing behind you gets my attention.
Yeah, so it's a comic book. They opened a
Yeah,
new comic book store in and close to me, and I'm not a huge comic book nerd, but I am a little bit. Like Big Bang Theory is
yeah,
kind of right up my alley. Actually, on Prime right now, the original Masters of the Universe cartoon is on
yeah.
Prime.
No,
So
I remember watching those when I was little.
there was
Big,
so
big He-Man.
I was getting ready for this, so I had it just turned on while I was kind of studying, and I had forgot about all the little different aspects of the show until, I watched a few episodes as an adult. But yeah, they also have the really good one in there. They have the Conan. Uh,
Oh, yes.
yeah.
There you
So,
go.
and then I'm a huge Supernatural fan. So I bought the
Okay. Yeah,
first
I've never really
Supernatural one the
watched
other day.
that. Yeah, never
So,
really watched that one, but yeah. No, those were big in my young days. Masters of the Universe. It's awesome.
yeah, somehow this wall has just turned into an eclectic mix of everything I love in life.
Yeah,
So,
it's
yeah,
great.
it made it to the wall underneath the snaffle bit. So perfect.
Nice. That's great. Love it.
Well, Coach, thank you very much. And like I said, I appreciate your time. I know when you're running a full department, you don't get a whole lot of time by yourself. And so for you to use that to be on here is really cool.
Yep. Appreciate it. It's good.
Well, have a great day, man.
Yeah, you too. And like I said, I'll be listening on a few more.